So we just heard a great story, right? Anyone know what it's about? Does anyone know what it's about? 17 masters? Yeah, I mean, Jesus gives us a nice summary at the end. You cannot serve two masters, right? You either love the one and hate the other, or hate the one and love the other, and you cannot serve God and wealth, right? Thanks, Jesus, right? So we're sort of stuck with this after hearing a really bizarre story, right? You have a landowner with a manager. And the manager has been squandering his property, right? So he's a real estate guy. He has a lot of property. And he finds out, we don't know exactly how he's squandering the property, but it's enough to make the property owner dismiss the manager. You're fired, right? And so the manager, who's called the dishonest manager, decides to write down debt to ingratiate himself to all the people who owe the property owner money, or wheat, or oil, right? So he calls up the debtors. He says, "What do you owe my master?" And they say, "Well, 100 jugs of oil." He says, "Make it 80. I'm like, "Oh, I like this guy." You know, and then the next he says, "How much do you owe my master?" "I owe 100 barrels of wheat." "Make it 60, whatever, right? Write it down." And he's planning, that's his exit plan, right? He can't beg and he can't dig. So his thinking is, these people will like him, they'll take him in after he gets fired, right? When he's final job. And the property owner congratulates him. He's like, "Wow, you know, this is pretty smart of you to do this, right?" He's like, "Nice job." And then Jesus sort of commends the dishonest manager too. And what's interesting about this parable is that, you know, I read commentary on it, I've read commentary on this, I've preached it several times. And people don't know what to do with it. They're like, what the heck? You know, are we supposed to steal? Lie? You know, and we always focus on the manager, the dishonest manager. So what do you think? You know, I mean, when we get a parable, you know, half the time people are like, well, which one's Jesus, which one's God, and which one's us? Or who should we emulate in this parable? Like, what, you know, are we the property owner? You know, if you steal from me, I'm going to fire you, right? I mean, you know, who are we supposed to be? I don't know. That I don't know. I think it's interesting, though, because what we always assume, and we never hear, is that we never hear that Jesus himself calls the wealth accumulated by the property owner dishonest. He says it. And I can read it to you. If I can find it. It's a long paragraph, so give me a second. Okay, here we go. "If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust you to the true riches?" Right? So Jesus is called the property owner a crook. And according to Jesus, being faithful with dishonest wealth is writing down debt. Right? It's fascinating. Because we assume we give the property owner a pass. We're like, well, they got their money, right? You can't argue with success, right? That's what we say. But Jesus has some other idea. He says, no, these are ill-gotten gains. And how do we think, I mean, we've heard it before, but should we be lending, you know, I mean, this property owner, these people have to pay, you know, 100 barrels of oil or whatever that amounts to, or 100 barrels of wheat, right? How is lending usually talked about in the Bible anyway? Don't do it, right? Lending's not good usually in the Bible. That's absolutely right. What about the word justice? Even our prayers today, if you notice, they talked about general concepts. There was nothing in reference to the scripture itself. It was just a sort of blanket call for justice, you know, and we will live justly. You know, because apparently the authors of the prayers, I didn't write them out, they're given to us, didn't know what to do with this parable. But what is justice?
Fairness.
Does anyone know where the word comes from? Brian, do you know? No? Okay. We call it a scale now, but it used to be called a justice. Now we say the scales of justice. Yeah, the balance, right? And so there's a good story I can share about the scales of justice and how people are often paid. There's this, we'll say, a 19th century family, and the owner of the property had scales, and you would sort of mete out the payment by putting, weight. And they'd say, well, if these things are the same, then this is your pay. They put a stone on there. And actually, sometimes in the Old Testament or Hebrew scriptures, justice itself would reference a fair stone, right? And so the kids were playing in the owner's house one day, and they bonked into the scale, and they realized, wait a minute, the scale's off balance. It favors the owner. A lot of people couldn't read. A lot of people couldn't do math. How would they even know? Right? And it's not surprising that a lot of churches, especially German churches, had scales on the outside of the church. For this very reason, the scales of the church were considered to be true and honest. Because most people couldn't tell them. So if it's weighted in the owner's favor, every time you get paid, the owner's getting a little more, you're getting a little less. Dishonest wealth, right? Can anyone think of something like that today? What's that?
Tax havens.
Tax havens, all right, yeah. Well, unless you use one, right? But it's fair. No, yeah, tax havens, like offshore accounts, right? How much did Amazon pay in taxes this year? Nothing, right? Nothing. There are only 5 countries in the world that have more wealth than Apple, Google, and Amazon. So just think of that, how much power that is. That's a lot of money, right? And Jeff Bezos, he paid 0 taxes. So, he's an entrepreneur. He's, used to sell college books, and now he sells everything. An interesting story about him is, what's the grocery chain? Is it Grocer? Not Krauser's, Kroger's, I think it's called, right? Kroger's? Yeah, Kroger's. When Amazon looked at Whole Foods to buy it, Kroger's lost 20% of their wealth because Amazon looked at Whole Foods. Because people are like, oh no, Amazon's going to buy this too, and so, that's a lot of power right there, right? Jeff Bezos just got health benefits for some employees, right? And that's shareholder value, right? But if you think about it, good old Jeff could have paid for their entirety of all the benefits he cut worth in 2 hours of his own making. He makes enough money in 2 hours to cover it, right? So, so dishonest wealth, right? Amazon and all that. Should we use Amazon or not? I don't know. Okay, so that's one example. What's another example of dishonest wealth? Wow. Tax havens, yeah. Right. Disparity in pay, the pay gap between men and women, right? That's found in the church, too. That men and women are often paid different and offered different amounts of money for the same position. Pay gap, that's huge, right? What else? Come on, let's keep going here. I'm good. This is what I'm good at. I'm good at it. You guys are cheap. I can go, but I want you to tell me that. So,
tax inequity on the middle class. How do you pay a higher percentage than the rich?
okay. So yeah, all right, I hear what you're saying there. So the tax cuts for the affluent, right? All right, or is that, we got it, okay. What else? Is it interest? Yeah. Should we charge interest, right? Okay. Credit cards, okay. Credit debt? Yeah. Spiraling credit debt. I mean, student loans is low, right? I just heard someone say the other day, it was actually a elected official who said, we can bail out the banks, we can't bail out the kids. What else? Insider trading, yeah. My cousin's a hedge fund manager, he can tell you all about that. He makes $500,000 a year in bonuses. So what else?
I was explaining to my daughter about a house last year. I said, well, because we couldn't put 30% down, the bank wants us to pay mortgage insurance. Mm-hmm. Because they're afraid we can't make our payment.
Right.
So
was talking about private wealth, right? So, I mean, yeah, you can think about it in a lot of different ways. But so Jesus seems to be onto this, right? There's such thing as dishonest wealth. And in the first century, in the world that Jesus lived in, those who collected taxes, for example, right? Rome would say to the tax collector, here's what you have to get. And that comes to us. That comes to the Roman Empire. What you can get in excess of that, that's your salary. Right? But think about that, right? You're like, well, but you have a Roman tax collector, you know, a stand-in for the Roman Empire, saying, you got to pay 20% of this. What do you say, no? You know, guess who comes talking to you and you say, no, guys with spears, right? You know, so, well, yeah, that's how they made a living, right? And so people really didn't like tax collectors, and you hear that in the Bible too, right? Jesus hung out with tax collectors. And because sometimes they're also folks that try to make a living too, you know. And I'm sure there were some honest tax collectors, not all of them, right? And when you think about, you know, the people being conquered people, right? We're talking about the conquered people by the Roman Empire in Jesus' world, right? And so, you know, and I've said this before, the peace of Rome only extended in as much as you didn't try to rebel against Rome, you know. The Pax Romana was enforced by a sword, right? And so, you know, that really had to do with paying fealty to the emperor, or participating in markets, and if you could, if your religion could get it to be sanctioned, like Jews were in the first century, but not always, right? And so, so dishonest wealth. I just went to the global climate strike on Friday, which there's a lot of talk about dishonest wealth there. And, you know, I want to talk about well, first of all, we took our kids out of school on Friday. They were absent because Rowan didn't give them a pass. And we joined the 250,000 other people in New York City, which is just massive. I thought it was like 50,000, but I saw a tally that 250,000 people showed up in New York, over 4 million globally, 350,000 in Australia, many of whom staged a diet, right, for this kind of thing. And, you know, this was led by children, right? Children primarily led this march, and you could see it. There were kids everywhere. And what these kids, they're saying is that, you know, we don't have a right to vote, but we see that the way that adults are carrying on, they're harming our future, right? And so what else can they do? You know, but demonstrate and protest. And so when they had speakers there, you know, the 250,000 marched from Foley Square down to Battery Park, and there was a stage, a platform, and speakers and so forth. And you know, one of the things that has been brought up, and I brought it up last week in advance of this, is that you know the original studies that found out that there was such a thing as climate change came from Exxon in 1977. And that's, you can read that in Scientific America. They were the first ones to talk about how what they were doing was damaging. And now even oil companies and others are saying, we need to take it easy here, you know. And so, but that's like, you know, when you think about like cigarette sales, right? The people who sold cigarettes knew it was wrong for a long time. And they covered up the fact that it was, in the form of lobbying and other things. And the oil companies did essentially the same thing. So one of the things that this march said is that these folks have known about this for a long time. And they're trying to cover it. You know, and so that is the wealth dishonest. Now, tomorrow, thinking that we can transition from oil to the green would be nearly impossible, right? The question they raise is, should these companies who have known what they're doing and had the capital to perhaps invest elsewhere, you know, pay up? Should they pay up, right? But it's a question, though, right? I mean, if we know it's not good, why are we doing it? Is that dishonest wealth? So I think here, when we go back to the parable, I think if there's a Jesus character in it, it's the dishonest man, in one way or another. And the reason that is that this character is literally diminishing the debt owed to someone. Right? Like the hero here is someone who's taking a part of an economy, a shell of it and creating a new one. Moving from an international or global economic system to a village system. Right, I'm going to share reciprocity. Yes?
What gives that manager the right to lower what these people are?
What gives him the right? Well, that isn't clear in the paragraph. He didn't get in trouble from the property manager for doing it. It could be that he had the right to do it, and that, I think what happens here is, I would guess, that similar to the tax collector, there was a minimum amount he had to get from these people, and the excess amount, his own profit, he gave to others. But don't forget, and this is where it gets challenging, I think, for us as a people who say we don't want to steal, we don't want to lie, which we don't want to do, right? I'm not advocating for that. But I also want to recognize, right, that those values that I work hard to instill in my kids, right? You know how it is, right? If your parents, it's really, you're working up against, a culture which doesn't seem to mind these things, right? So I instill these values. I say, don't steal, don't lie, don't do this, right? But then I look at our economic practices, and they operate by a different set of rules, right? So my kids, they say, well, this isn't fair. How can this happen? How can this guy, like Jeff Bezos, not pay any taxes when you've got to pay whatever? You know what I mean? To a kid, they're like, what is this? And somehow or another, our mantra is you can't argue with success, profits, etc. There are two operating sets of morality. There's like an interpersonal one, and then there's another one. And I think it's okay to recognize that. But what is happening here, though, think about those kids that I told that story about, that they found out the scale was off balance. Then what do you do? You say, well, I don't want to upset the owners of the scale, so I'm just going to keep getting fleeced. That's right. Yeah, and so I think here, inherent in this parable is that the, quote, dishonest manager, to be faithful with dishonest money is to give it back to the people who it belongs to. We, for some reason or another, we can't even see or question the property owner. Right? You ask, what right does the manager have in giving away this money? But Jesus seemed to be saying, that's the faithful thing to do. And this is like Robin Hood, right? In one way or another. And that's hard. All right? But if people are lying and cheating and stealing, and people are getting fleeced, well, I guess then 250,000 people show up in New York City. Over 4 million people show up across the world and say, this is messed up. And so I wonder, how many times do we have to just say, well, they made a lot of money, that's fine. But Jesus here, and this is a first century thing, and this is not something this is a contrast in how we think about wealth, right? Because we idolize rich people, right? They're on the covers of magazines, they're on the cover of Forbes and Bloomberg and all that, and then people look at these people and say, wow, look at their work ethic, whatever it is. But in the first century, people who were extremely wealthy were looked at very suspiciously. It's how did you get so much money when we're all working hard and you have so much? We heard it in Amos, right? We heard it in this psalm. Over and over again, the Bible's like, if you got rich, how many people did you have to screw to get there? And so here, a first century reader of this text would look at that property owner with suspicion. We have a hard time. And that's something worth thinking about. Because when I asked, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, nobody said the property owner. Right? We didn't even see it. We just gave him a pass. Because we think ownership is more important than how they got, or how they obtained the thing that they own. Right? So another example, could be, somebody stole a house, 80 years ago. And this person now, and they're 100 years old, right? And they're charging people all this rent, and they made all this money, and we're saying, well, they're taking advantage of people living in the house. And then somebody's family's like, but he stole that house from me. You're going to talk about, let's take the house back. Don't worry about giving a fair rate for people to live there. That's what Jesus is saying here. Take the property back. So, I think I love this parable because we never see it coming. I've been here 3 years. This is the third time I've preached this parable. I said the same thing every time. So we don't have a bad teacher, but no one ever sees it coming because you just forget, right? And you're just like, well, So think about it. Jesus, at the end of the day, is saying you cannot serve two masters. You cannot serve God and wealth. If you filter that from the parable, the wealth is the property, it's the right down to the property, and then it's the relationship built because of the right down to the property. That's serving God in this parable. You cannot serve God and wealth. That's the only way the parable makes sense. To serve God. And we can try. When we think about how our economy works and how big all this is, it's really hard to just step out of it. But within it, we can carve out little kingdoms of God. Giving, sheltering, taking care of others, inviting people who you know that they can't pay you back for inviting them, right? That's the message. Do the work. And the payback, and I'm honest to God, this is the fact, the payback that you get from that is this feeling of communion with God. Giving things away for nothing. It's a holy thing. It is holy. And if you've been in Operation Warm or you're taking care of the homeless, you know what I'm talking about. If someone owed you money, you're like, don't worry. You know what I'm talking about. And when you give time that you don't have for a good cause, you know what I'm talking about. And when you forgive a relative, friend, or coworker for something that you know they did wrong and you shouldn't, you know what I'm talking about. That's what Jesus does. That's what we're called to do. And it's not as if we're saying this miserable existence or like angry about doing this stuff. Like actually this stuff brings joy. It really does. That's the kingdom of God. That's what's right here. So now we're all going to go back to our jobs and get fired, right? Or you just might. Last bit, I used to work as a financial advisor. And you've heard me talk about this before. And I did really well in my first 6 months because I needed to eat. And pretty soon thereafter, I became a coach. I was meeting with other people, going to their meetings, talking to people. I had a sales script as a funnel, very psychologically put together for people to be able to buy and sell stuff. And after a while, I started having all these meetings with people that didn't have any money. And they were like, I guess we can meet with you, but we don't have any money. I'm like, well, you have a lot of debt? I'm like, yeah, so let's do debt consolidation. Let's talk about using internet calculators and stuff. And I was invited over to people's houses and their house churches. I gave testimony from the Baptist church. And all of this is to say that those interactions fed me more than when I was putting eventually I had to go because, what would happen as a financial advisor, you'd fall behind the draw, right? You'd owe more than you're taking in. But that led me to seminary. Those people that I met with led me to seminary. Like, you should go to seminary. And I didn't listen. I took another job at J.P. Morgan Chase. So it's the high altar of the Antichrist. Which is just kidding. That led me to God. And it was really hard to put food on the table. It was really hard because I owned a home. But I felt better than I ever did in my life. I really did. And I just wanted more. So let me in. believe in God by what we do. Who's taking care of the poor in town? Who's taking care of the kids in town? Who's taking care of the seniors in town? And who's doing the work? That's who we are. And I thank God every single day that I